things will be right without a doubt. Yeah, and they just me until today. I'll be a knight, brave and be mine. No more lies to blind my eye. Choose what you lose, and now I take up a separate war. Gonna fight through what I want. That's what it takes. So close to the glow, hate to life that I will hold. Now it's time to gather what's lost. Show me how stars fall down until you shine bright. Wherever you go, then I'll be your side, so that we can stand under the night. I'll keep through all time. Sometimes it's alright, the voice that screams out unspoken time. Yeah, and they push you up. Don't fret, here's a night who proves what's right. No more lies to deceive the right. Choose what you lose, and now I'll take a piece of a war. Gonna fight through what we want. That's how it's done this way. Time is running short, so why are you lost? Couldn't you believe the truth, darling? Don't you worry, 'cause I'm here now, and we'll still shine. Time is getting close, let's gather what's lost. Collect our laundry, and here's time. There's a word I'll keep through all time.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Game of the Year 2024 discussion here at the Landy Lodge. And I'm excited for today's episode. Well rested from the holidays, ready to rock 2025, but we can't do that until we look back on 2024 and, in my opinion, talk about what a blessing of a year it was for games. Tough year for the industry, great year for games. But we'll get into that. We're here to talk about Game of the Year stuff, everything else aside. Of course, couldn't do it without these sages of the lodge, these beautiful names that you see here up on your screen as we're going to fade that music out. I have no idea if the volume was mixed well on that. Was kind of just taking a risk and feeling the groove. Anyway, Sages of the Lodge, YouTube channel members, longtime Twitch subscribers, the direct donations are currently down. We are rebuilding essentially that platform and that way of giving back to the lodge. But before we get into today's episode, I feel I got a couple of announcements before we send some love out to you early birds. There will be no morning quest tomorrow. Given that we're doing this podcast tonight, we're going to forego on morning quest tomorrow and bring it back the following week to start off the new year for that. Additionally, this is going to be the last podcast before we make a major change here at the Lodge. And I'll let those of you who tune in to these more niche episodes, as I always do, get the sort of inside scoop of what we're cooking here at the Lodge. And again, before we get in today's episode, we're going to be changing our look. We're going to stay the Landy Lodge, but everything else is basically getting a complete makeover. Going to have a new color scheme, going to have a new logo, new banner, new stream assets, new transitions, everything's going to look new. Lodge has gone through a couple phases, and even though I have a lot of love for the Lodge's history and our sort of psychedelic aesthetic with the all-seeing eye, I feel as though the Lodge has evolved into something bigger, has evolved into something else. So our look will be reflecting a little bit more of that in the future. On top of that, we're going to keep the game streams going, but all podcasts will be put on halt until that visual makeover is ready to go. But again, you guys get the inside scoop because you tune into the niche episodes. But yeah, while we're going through that transition, I'll still stream our Nuzlocke. I'll stream some Marvel Rivals. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. But the next podcast we do is going to look very different. It'll look very different. With that out of the way, got a few more things we could talk about, but we could save that for the end of the episode. For the real sickos, Valid, Change is Scary. We can't wait to see how it looks. It's going to look great. It's going to look so much better. It's going to suit us much more. I'm going to move the chat over here. Feel like you guys can be seen better there if you're not covering the light. Anyway, I think it's going to suit us better what's coming. I think now's the time to do it. Again, we primarily cover Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy here. Both of those series are in an off season. It's quiet mode, airplane mode, you might say. So I figured this is the perfect time to sort of do a rebrand and sort of mix up our look. And again, this is going to stay the same. Like back here is going to stay the same, but like our logo, the way things look on stream, the general aesthetic, that starting soon screen, everything's getting overhauled. Anyway, let's give some love to you early birds. I see we got a lot of you in here already. Vey Victos over on Twitch, Rock Spaceship Artist Joint, Vitrin, Zeb, Adonai, Dex Holder, Trousers, and that's everybody, our early birds. What is going on? Moving chat, changes already. Yeah, look at me, already doing it. Is this discussion going to include spoilers? No, it will not, and honestly, you're the second person to ask that, so I'm actually going to put in the title, spoiler free. This way people know. That's a very good question, Dex Holder. There will not be any spoilers. All footage you see will be nothing from trailers. We're not going to play any cutscenes. I'm not going to bring up endings or any spoilers. I'll let people know how I feel about stories, plots, characters, and things like that. But I'm not going to give it away. Don't you worry. And now Carmilla is here. What's going on, Carmilla? Very good to see you. And Liam Hughes moving right in. Anyway, without further ado, I've been rambling. We're already about 8 minutes in. Andy Brew just popped in, so now you know things are getting real. Let's start with the honorable mentions. I have 4 what I'll consider Landy Lodge Game of the Year nominees. And that's going to be Rebirth. It's the ones you saw in the thumbnail. It's going to be Rebirth, Astrobot, Metaphor, and Stellar Blade. But those are my 4 Game of the Year nominees. Let's talk about my 4 honorary mentions for 2024. Starting with perhaps the biggest surprise, at least for me, Marvel Rivals. Which, listen, those of you who tune into the show regularly, you know I have been very tough on Marvel, that I have not really enjoyed anything they've put out post-Endgame, minus Spider-Man No Way Home. I thought that was pretty good, but even that was relying so much on nostalgia, so much on stuff that came before it. Now, with that said, Marvel Rivals, plain and simple, is just good. Proving that I'm not just a bitter Marvel hater. All I wanted was something good, or at least something that fits my tastes, putting it that way. Marvel Rivals is it. I don't know how else to say it. I think, like, why Marvel Rivals appealed to me, where the shows and the movies have fallen short, I actually think a lot of it, has to do with aesthetic, right? Aesthetically, this is why Marvel Rivals appealed to me, but Square Enix's Avengers did not. The aesthetics that this game has, both in its art style, its animation, its character design, it's all awesome, man. It's all awesome. That's all I'm going to say. The character designs are great. It's a good, like, sort of, I don't like using the term reimagining, but not all these outfits are comic accurate, which is okay. Comic accuracy can be a very good thing when it comes to outfits, but at the same time, you also have to leave room that maybe there's an artist out there that could think of a new look or a new skin or a new outfit for these characters. And you're starting to see that. And, you know, I think it's easy to tell when something is made with love and when it has a love for its audience. Marvel Rivals appears that way to me simply because of all the sort of, how do I put it? Not Easter eggs, but all the sort of little secrets and little ways they tied everything together in this game. So it's like all the heroes and villains in this game, they don't all come from one Marvel universe. They're sort of being pulled out of a bunch of different Marvel universes, almost in the way Smash Brothers works, where none of these characters really share a world or share a universe, but they all kind of get pulled out of their individual universes into this arena. Marvel Rivals is sort of doing the same thing here. What do we got here? Landy has been cooking with Hela in Rivals. Hela and Mantis, bro. Hela and Mantis have been my two mains. They had to nerf Hela. They just nerfed Hela. It was because of me. It was all because of me. They were tired of me going 22-0 on stream. They were tired of it. Tired of that. So they had to nerf Hela because of me. I did it. It was all me, guys. I'm sorry. Anyway, I think your Rivals take is beyond fair considering it's no shock you normally don't have grief on Square. I don't. I have no beef with Square. You know I love Square Enix. But their Avengers game just did not appeal to me because it looked, and this is a word I've been using lately, it looked uninspired. Whereas Marvel, it really seemed like they had some artists in there who wanted to, you know, give these characters a unique expression that's still true to who they are at their core in the comics, in their own universes. Again, like a lot of the male characters, you know, there's, how do I put this? Swig for the hardworking men and women at that studio. But anyway, you know, the men all look, you know, very gruff and masculine and cool and muscular. And the sort of like, how would you put it? The sort of niche characters like Rocket Raccoon and Groot, they all have like cool designs. You know, the women are very feminine and beautiful. Mantis, I do miss Mantis's bug eyes. You know what I mean? I get that they gave her normal human eyes. It's more comic accurate. I know it's easier for people to look at. But that was something I think the movies actually did good, was that the Mantis eyes look like an actual bug. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Again, I love all the designs. You know, I think they did a great job with that. But let's talk about the gameplay, because that's the most important thing. So I was a big Overwatch head back in the day. And this is one of the reasons this game surprised me so much. I was a huge Overwatch head back in the day. Literally, I remember back when I had my old job, that was like 10 minutes from my apartment. I would get an hour for lunch. I would drive home, play like 30 minutes of Overwatch, drive back to work, try to move up in the rankings. I was trying to make Diamond. I was always in Gold. I was able to touch Diamond, but I'd get kicked right back down into Gold. It was tough out in the streets of Overwatch. But Overwatch was a great game because I feel like it gave... If you typically weren't into shooters, right? I've had my fun with shooters. I loved Gears of War. I loved Halo. But they don't tickle my fancy the way RPGs and fighters do. And even the way some platformers do. But these sort of hero shooters, they make it so compatible that, you know, if you'd rather feel like you were playing an action melee game, they have characters for you. There's sort of these ways they can mix up the gameplay in traditional FPS that make it so appealing. And like I will talk about in FF7 Rebirth when I bring that up later, but the ability to cycle between all these heroes keeps the gameplay feeling fresh, feeling so fresh. You know what I mean? That's one of the advantages you have when you have a cast of characters to play as, is if a game starts to feel redundant, just swap out your hero. Play as someone that makes you a little uncomfortable. You know, they really did a tremendous job. I don't really have much else to say. I don't think it's Game of the Year worthy. I still think it has some logistics it needs to catch up with to be on par with Overwatch at its peak. If they can improve the servers, reduce lag, reduce people getting booted out of the game, I think that would give it leaps and bounds towards where Overwatch was. But look, it's a fun game. It honors its source material. It loves its audience. The skins are cool. It's free to play. All in all, great job on their part. I'm happy because I had a great time. Look, I grew up reading Spider-Man comics and X-Men. Spider-Man and X-Men were really the only Marvel I really touched. MCU, I got into all these other characters. That was one of the appealing things about it. But it's good to see Marvel just rolling again. That makes me very happy to see. You know what I mean? I can be hard on things like Marvel. I can be hard on things like DC. But I want them to succeed. And Marvel Rivals to me is such a such a big step in the right direction. I wish the West could have developed it. I wish the West had it together that they could have made Marvel Rivals. For those who don't know, it was a game developed in China. But if that's what we have to do, at this point, that's where we're at. These Western IPs have to outsource to the East to make something their audiences like. One day, I hope that Marvel and the West can keep this in-house and make this game over here. But if this is what we got to do for now to get the games we want to play, so be it. So be it. All right, let's move on to my next honorary mention, which is a game that I feel truly does not get enough love. You guys have heard me sing its praises forever, and that's Tekken 8, which I think is one of the best fighting games mechanically to come out in the last few years. I do think its one-player mode fell completely short compared to Street Fighter. I did prefer Street Fighter's one-player mode, but I much preferred the fighting mechanics in Tekken 8. Also, for you Final Fantasy fans, Clive's in there now, which is great. Look, it's a fun game, man. It's a fun game. And, you know, one of the things Tekken does right, as you're kind of seeing on screen, is like the characters are all so cool and unique. And if you're going to make a fighting game, the characters have to be alluring in some way, right? The characters they either have to look cool or interesting or sexy or insane or, you know, there's got to be something about them that's just loud. You know what I mean? That's visually loud. And Tekken does that full force. The OST is incredible. That's the other thing. Tekken's soundtrack is so good. So good. That's it. You look like a homeless person right now. That's good. It's the beard. Oh, is it because of my cardigan? Is the cardigan making me look a little too lax? Is it? And the beard? I mean, I don't know, man. I'm pretty sure this is a good ways away from a homeless beard. Maybe where you live has some very high standards, but anyway, sorry, still here. It's all good, man. Tekken 8, the final DLC for FF16. Yeah, I guess Clive survived, right? Technically speaking. I have a video about that if you want to go on the deep dive. Anyway, getting back into Tekken. You know, I think the character creator could use some work. And give me 1 second. I think ultimately where Tekken fell short, why I'm not going to consider it a Game of the Year candidate, is because as good as this fighting game is, and as good as it is as its core, I do believe fighting games, the one-player modes have to evolve. And if your one-player mode hasn't evolved past fight, cutscene, fight, cutscene, and the cutscenes, by the way, are usually just characters talking to each other, fight, cutscene, fight, cutscene. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's kind of how fighting game one-player campaigns have been. Do I have this on loop? I do. Have been since forever. I think you have to mix it up these days. I really do. But Tekken did a great job. I had a great time playing it. Very fun mechanically to play. Very good online rollback. All of it's good. All of it's good. A lot of love to Tekken. Not Game of the Year worthy, but still deserves a lot of love. Almost Game of the Year worthy. Almost. Let's keep it rolling. Next one I've got for you. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. Now look, I'm going to make this an honorary mention, not because I think it's the greatest game in the world, because I don't. I think it's a very cheesy fighter. I think it's very easy to cheese this game, but it's a game that knows its audience. And it's a game that knows that its audience obviously is not fighting game fans, but Dragon Ball fans. And first and foremost, if I examine this game as a Dragon Ball game and not a fighting game, it's tremendous. It's tremendous. It gave Dragon Ball fans things they were asking for a long time. What if scenarios, more customization, a campaign mode that isn't just replaying the story. Obviously, there were little, like, you know, you play episode Piccolo, episode Gohan, you visit parts of the story, but there was so much more to the one-player mode than that. Kind of building off my point with Tekken earlier, is that fighting games have to evolve their campaign modes. They have to. That's how you're going to get longevity, because not everybody is going to want to compete online. Not everybody is going to have a buddy they can play on the couch with. Fighting games need to have a mode that entices players that don't want to compete to come back, or don't have someone to play on the couch with to come back. I think Street Fighter did that tremendously. I think Dragon Ball Fighter Zero does that tremendously. I do believe Tekken fell short a little bit there, but just a little bit. that's just the sparking video game series in general. Yeah. I mean, I played the Budokais back in the day. Technically speaking, it's not the greatest fighter in the world. Again, you can cheese it. The characters are unbalanced, but that's not a problem because it's fun. If you're a Dragon Ball fan, there's no way you can play this game and not have fun unless you hate fighting games, right? That unique combination, then you won't have a good time. But you like Dragon Ball, you like fighting games, this game is for you. It's that simple. And again, rest in peace, Toriyama. Very tough loss in the year of 2024. I don't got much more to say after that. Next would be a game that I think everybody would have expected I would have given a Game of the Year nod this year, but it just missed, and that's going to be Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. Now, you guys know me. I am a Final Fantasy XIV shill. It might be my favorite game of all time. Might be. It's close. It's up there. It's in the top 3, top 5. I can really only give you a top 5 with confidence. But Final Fantasy XIV, one of the greatest games I've ever played. New expansion dropped, FF14 Dawntrail, which was tremendous. Tremendous. I had a great time playing this. Give me 1 second, actually. Got to fix something over here. There we go. All right. That's right. Okay, perfect. So anyway, back to the Dawntrail of it all. I have some thoughts. So there's a reason I didn't give this a Game of the Year nod. Obviously, Dawntrail was fun. I had a great time with it. I think it's a great expansion, but it doesn't compare to Shadowbringers and Endwalker. To be fair, the FF14 was always clear they weren't trying to create something that could be as grandiose or compete with the likes of Shadowbringers and Endwalker. What they wanted to do was to create an expansion that had lower stakes and allowed for the player to kind of rest on their heels a little bit, which I did like. Love this game, working my way to get all classes to 100. You dog. Dude, I love FF14, man. Like I said, top 5 game of all time for me. Might even be number 1. Absolutely love it. Dawntrail, and I liked the story. I thought the story was very good. I had a good time with it. I liked a lot of the new characters. I liked Wook Lamont. I think there was too much Wook Lamont, and I think that hurt the story. So, for instance, there were really, let's say there were sort of 2 big movements in Dawntrail's story. You had the plot with Wook Lamont, right? Without getting too much into it. You had the plot with Wook Lamont, which was very sort of geopolitical. And then you had the plot with Kryl and Erenvel. Now, for me, when I think of Dawntrail, and I think about the moments that hit me the hardest, moments that mean the most, when I think Dawntrail, I'm thinking about Kryl and Erenvel. I'm not thinking about Wook Lamont. And considering that so much of the plot was focused on Wook Lamont, and Erenvel and Kryl, while their sort of story was a secondary plot, it did really take a back seat to what was going on at the forefront. I think that hurt the story. I do think that hurt the story because I think, I know that with new expansions, it's always good to release a new character and bring something more into the mix. But I actually think FF14's at the point where I think a lot of us, while we will embrace newer characters like Wook Lamont, I think what we want to see is characters we already love, like Kryl and Erenvel, get more depth, or at least split that time more evenly. Kryl and Erenvel should have gotten the same amount of weight on the scale as Wook Lamont. So for me, when I think about the cast of FF14, I hope that moving forward, that some of the Scions who may not have gotten character arcs in a little bit, like Urianger and Y'shtola. Actually, that's not fair for Urianger. But maybe like Y'shtola, I think that might be more appropriate in the future. However, stories are stories. Let's talk about the gameplay of it all. Again, a lot of the content in Dawntrail I found to be very enjoyable. I thought the boss designs showed a lot of improvement, and you can kind of see the direction the gameplay is going to grow. However, ultimately, I think Dawntrail's gameplay fell short, right? Because you wanted to create this atmosphere that the Warrior of Light and the world of Eorzea is chilling out a little bit. We're taking a breather, right? That's kind of what they said they wanted this to feel like, was that we were going to take a breather after Shadowbringers and Endwalker. I feel like the gameplay failed in that way. Not from a combat sense. Again, I complimented the combat. I think the combat was very good. But I think for all the different ways to engage with the world of FF14, I felt that Dawntrail trying to make this feel like a breather, it ultimately fell a little bit short. Now, Yoshi P and the team are talking about things that I think should have been ready for Dawntrail at launch. For instance, they've talked about creating a mode that allows you to spend quality time with characters from the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. I love that. I think we need more of that. But if you wanted to create that Dawntrail atmosphere of this is just you're coming up for air, I think that was something that needed to be ready for Dawntrail, because when I boot up Dawntrail post-campaign, it feels just like Endwalker post-campaign. Without the campaign and the updates there, the game very much feels the same post-Endwalker, post-Shadowbringers. So what I think they ought to do, while the Dawntrail expansion is still going on between now and the inevitable next one, they have to add these modes that add a little bit more life sim energy or allow us to explore the depth of some of these characters that we've been adventuring with for years. But yeah, I will leave Dawntrail at that. Had a great time playing it. Highly recommend FF14 to anyone. I think it's an expansion on par with Stormblood. I think it falls short of Endwalker, Shadowbringers, and Heavensward. Better than A Realm Reborn, though. And A Realm Reborn is still very good. I think people are way too hard on A Realm Reborn. I think it's honestly fantastic. Not fantastic might be overblowing it a little bit. But I do think it's great. I do think it's great. Okay. With that out of the way, it's time to talk about who is our Game of the Year. I've narrowed it down. Now, again, there are some games I haven't played that obviously have been considered or worth considering. Didn't play Black Myth Wukong. Didn't play Balatro. So keep that in mind. Two very popular choices for Game of the Year that I haven't played. But of the games I did play, what's going on, Luz? Of the games I did play, we've got here Astrobot, Metaphor, FF7, and Stellar Blade. I really feel like these games, when I think of 2024, these are the first games to come to mind. Now, there's a lot I want to discuss. Obviously, quality of gameplay is the number one most important thing we're going to talk about. The biggest influence on my decision is going to be gameplay, first and foremost. The second most influential decision I'm going to have, and people can feel however you want to feel about it, but the thing I'm going to consider number two to gameplay is actually going to be, was the game successful? We'll get into that more. After that, with gameplay, we talk about things like story, characters, soundtrack, and of the like. But gameplay is going to carry like 80% of the weight. That's going to carry most of the weight. Story and plot, as well as was the game successful? Because if we're going to choose a Game of the Year, I think that is important. I think good business practices are important. Because I want this industry to thrive. And I think if a game truly is a Game of the Year, to me that means it set an example that the rest of the industry can follow in one way or another. Right? So, again, you can make the greatest game ever made, but if you spent $500 million making it and didn't profit, nobody cares. You didn't change the industry. No studio is going to look at you and want to emulate what you did, which I think is important too, is which one of all these games is also likely to be emulated by their competitors in the future. I think that's also something to consider, right? We all know Breath of the Wild won Game of the Year, and you can see after Breath of the Wild releases, wins Game of the Year, you can start to see the shadow and the ripple of Breath of the Wild through the industry in the years that followed. I think stuff like that also indicates what's truly a Game of the Year. Now, Amber is here. What's going on, Amber? Thanks for dropping in. And shout out to all of you who have been dropping in. Let's get started, shall we? We'll come back to this screen here and there. But let's get started. And let's get started. Whoop. 1 second. I don't know how that happened. Let me fix that. Okay. There we go. And then if I don't know why I'm getting so many calls this podcast. It's like the third phone call I've gotten. It's like they don't want me. They don't want me to tell you what the Game of the Year is. They're desperate to stop me. They're desperate to stop me. Let's talk Astrobot, okay? Let's talk Astrobot. This is a game. Obviously, the Game Awards awarded it Game of the Year. but that's not going to carry much weight here. But to Astrobot's credit, this may be the best 3D platformer I have ever played. I'm going to come out and say it. This might be the best 3D platformer I have ever played. Now, I'm a big platforming-wise, Sonic the Hedgehog was always my guy over Mario, though I played a lot of 3D Mario platform RPGs. I thought Odyssey was emblematic of its time. But Astrobot, to me, is just... I think what I loved so much about it, too, was that it made me feel seen as someone who's been on the PlayStation ride all this time. Right? I had a PS1. I had a PS2. Probably, other than Switch, my biggest library is my PS4 library. I've been on the PlayStation ride. Playing Astrobot, honestly, it was like a ride through my childhood, and then a ride through my teenage years, and then we arrive at modern day. Here we are playing Astrobot. You know, maybe I can't play Jak and Daxter anymore. Maybe that is a thing of the past. But through Astrobot, it lives. Anyway, hard not to get romantic about the PlayStation days. But getting back to Astrobot, just the gameplay is so much fun. And again, there's so many mechanics, right? That, you know, I didn't like the argument some people had when they were like, oh, it's just a bunch of recycled Mario mechanics and this game's mechanics. I'm like, no, it sounds like they looked around. They said, what are the best platformers of our time? And how do we learn from all of them and integrate it into one controlled experience? And that's what Astrobot felt like to me. And, you know, I really can appreciate when a game has the ability to mix up its gameplay to the point that you feel fresh. So, for instance, in Astrobot, you have all the different planets you fly to that contain all different kinds of different platforming levels, sort of collectathon-ish. You know, I don't know if I would call it a collectathon. It's collectathon adjacent, perhaps you might say. But the planet where all the bots are hanging out and where you have to rebuild the PlayStation. Go into that planet and just hanging out, running around, seeing everybody doing their dances, seeing the different ways I could interact with all the bots and trying to find all the different secrets. Man, was that cool. Man, was that cool. I want every platformer to learn from that. I want every platformer to give you a little hub. And it's not anything new, right? We've seen this in platformers in the past. It just seems like something I haven't seen much of as of late, right? I've played Odyssey. I've played Sonic Frontiers. But giving the player a little hub world that was a representation of what they'd achieved, right? You look around, you see all the bots you rescued. You see all the things you won in the gacha machine. You see all the little micro platforming places you've unlocked. You see the PlayStation you're building, right? There's this hub world that you intermittently travel to, and it's showing you the progress of your journey. I think that's, I don't know, there was just something so cool about that I enjoyed. I don't know. Again, the way giving players a little hub and, you know, there's the pause button and then there's pausing the player. You know what I mean? And that might not be as clear as I'm trying to make it. But just being able to have a little world that you could sort of lounge in, right? Don't got to watch your back for enemies. Don't got to be afraid about dying and stuff like that. Anyway, that said, I think the thing about Astrobot is I think it's a perfect example of a game where years from now, you're going to see everybody emulating what they did in the platforming world. I think Astrobot, the reason why it's won so many Game of the Year awards and so many awards and why it's such a big talking point here at the end of the year is because, frankly, I think the platforming genre's changed forever. I think Astrobot changed the platforming genre forever. And that carries a lot of weight with it. Now, given it's not as competitive a genre as, say, RPGs are, right? The competition and the pool of talent is a lot smaller in platformers than in some of these more popular genres like action RPGs. But there's the pause button, then there's player pausing. There you go, Andy. That's what I'm looking for. This game looks so damn cute. It's charming. It's charming. It has a charm to it. And, you know, I can keep singing keep singing the gameplay's credit, right? Or singing its praises, rather. But let's talk a little bit about the fact this was a game made by like 70 people. this was a game made by a very small team. You know, I think in an industry that saw tens of thousands of layoffs in the last year or so, the answer isn't that we have all these big companies that hire 18,000 people like Ubisoft. What it means is we get an industry that has 1,000 Team Asobis giving 100 people jobs, right? You don't need a handful of Ubisofts giving people 20,000 jobs. No, you want like hundreds, if not like 1,000 Team Asobis out there, because then their turnaround is going to be quicker. The way they're able to service their customers is going to be quicker. I mean, look at the amount of DLC and sort of expansions that Astrobot has already gotten. We're going to talk about that with some other games going down the line here. But ultimately, it's a game that just does everything right. And it fully utilized the power of the PS5. I felt that 100%, Andy. The fact that you could have, what? How many bots can you have on screen at once? Andy, you probably know that, so feel free to punch that in. But the amount of characters and assets that can be on the screen at once, let alone assets that you, the player, can interact with, is something that was mind-blowing just a decade ago. Just a decade ago. It means more games, too. Exactly, Trousers. Exactly. Exactly. The future of gaming is going to look very different, and we're going to do a podcast on that soon. That's probably 2 or 3 podcasts from now. I want to talk about the real future. We talked about the state of the industry. I actually want to talk about the future of games development, because I think that's going to change quite a lot. All 301, now 310 with DLC, 310 bots on screen at once. That is insane, dude. Absolutely insane. 311, excuse me. 311. All right. But yeah, I mean, Astrobot's just a game that does everything right. It's got the kind of gameplay that you're going to see inspire developers for years to come. It's a complete love letter to the PlayStation audience, which you love to see that. I think the industry needs more of that. Soundtrack is great. Doesn't compare to the soundtrack of the other 3 games, in my opinion, but the soundtrack is great. And again, very, very solid business practices, which will create a happier and healthier industry with a happier customer. Now, let us move on to our next one. I don't know why I switched back to this screen. No reason for me to do that. Let's talk about the next game on our list, which is one I'm very excited to talk about. And there are plenty of podcasts in the works to come. I know we got a new First Soldier chapter we got to discuss, but let's talk Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This was the game I was the most excited for this year. Man, what a ride. What a ride. And perhaps the greatest combat system I have ever played exists right here in FF7 Rebirth. There's a game on this list that will compete for that. We'll talk a little bit. I don't want to say compete with that. I'll explain myself when we get there. Let's keep it FF7 Rebirth focus. This is my favorite action combat system of all time. I already felt that way with Remake. Rebirth did a good job of making this feel like a console leap. I was very skeptical whether or not Rebirth would feel, from a gameplay perspective, like a console leap from FF7 Remake. But all in all, it did. All in all, it did. And the synthesis attacks were probably the biggest thing. The synthesis attacks were probably the biggest thing when it came to making this game feel like it was next gen. And there are a few games that we've had do that so far. Unfortunately, I wish there were more games on the PlayStation 5 that I could look at and say, oh yeah, that had to be next gen. There's no way that couldn't be that could have been previous gen. But in playing through FF7 Rebirth, it genuinely gave me the feel of like, oh, this is what a PS5 game should feel like, with the haptic feedback and the very powerful performance, right? The game performed very well. The extent of the combat, again, the amount of assets you were able to have on screen. That's the other thing. We just talked about that with Astrobot. Jesus, walking through Nibelheim, man. Walking through Nibelheim, the way, like, you got to think about that too. The fact that FF7 Rebirth, and this was something Remake did well as well, with a much more limited framework and a much more limited technology, was to make the world of Gaia feel alive, feel lived in. That's something that I actually think is so lacking in today's gaming world is so many of these worlds, they don't feel lived in. They feel barren. It doesn't feel like people here have a routine or that there's a life or a culture to any of the places you visit. And I think a lot of companies have covered that up by putting you in a post-apocalyptic world. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of my favorite games are in a post-apocalyptic world. Breath of the Wild, Nier Automata, list goes on. But if you're in an FF7 Rebirth situation and it's not a post-apocalyptic world, you have to make a world that feels very real, feels lived in, feels populated, right? Feels alive. And they accomplished that tenfold. We talked about this when I did an episode on it way back earlier in the year, but this game's world feels more alive than any game I think I've ever played before. The world of Final Fantasy VII in FF7 Rebirth feels more alive than any other gaming world I've had the joy of traveling to. And that cannot be understated. Mo Chocolate's in the house. What up, dude? Junon was also insane with all the soldiers following you and everything. That's what I mean. One of those things that gave you that sort of next-gen feel. Andy Bruce, synergy attacks were peak gameplay fiction. They were. That's what I'm saying. The synergy attacks, the amount of control, the amount of, like, the fact that you could play as one character, but through synergy attacks and the command menu, could really feel like you were controlling an onslaught of 3 characters at once. Man, dude, this is another example. I think every party-focused action RPG will be looking at FF7 Rebirth and emulating what it is they did here moving forward. I really think there is a like what the FF7 Remake Trilogy is doing for action RPGs. I actually I don't want to understate it, because I actually think what's happening here, and don't get me wrong, other series have done it, like Tales of Arise is technically action RPG and lets you shift around and play as different characters. So it's not like that concept in and of itself is new to the action RPG genre, but I think Final Fantasy, how do I put it? Action RPGs came to Final Fantasy a long time ago. FF7, to me, has brought Final Fantasy into the action RPG world, right? The action RPG world came to Final Fantasy long ago. But FF7 is bringing Final Fantasy to the action RPG world. And what I mean by that is, I think what they accomplished here in the ability to be able to not only cycle between all these different characters, which leads to new movesets, new builds, new gameplay mechanics, all at the press of a button, but they also gave you the ability to control the other 2 characters that you're not using. You could be controlling Cloud, and you can set up Barret and Yuffie to do a synthesis attack while you're still controlling Cloud with the press of a couple buttons. There's something so remarkably crazy about that. There's something so immersive about that, where there's absolutely no combat system in the world that feels anything close to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, that was one of the things, when you think about bringing action RPG to Final Fantasy, I mean, this is one of the things that held FF15 back, was it felt like you were just only controlling Noctis and your party members were just filler. You could activate certain special moves, and they've added things to flesh this out more, but especially at launch, it really felt like you were just controlling Noctis with a few gimmick attacks with your friends. With the FF7, it's like, no, the party mechanic is back. The feeling of being a party is back. And that's something that the world of FF7 has done within action RPGs, which is not an easy task. With turn-based combat, we figured that out long ago. But now with action RPGs, I believe FF7 has created a model here that I think every action RPG that has a party-focused narrative should emulate henceforth. Because, man, it's real cool at the press of the D-pad to feel like you're playing a fresh experience. Man, it's real cool to give your party all these different builds, so no matter what, you can make this game feel fresh again. Now, of course, there's only so much you can do at the end of the day, but the game does give you a lot. And all these characters really, really do feel different. and they're a pleasure to play as. So again, we've talked about the combat, which I think is the highlight. I think they've created something generational here. We've talked about the world and the immersion and feeling lived in. I think that's terrific. I think that's tremendous. I think it does it better than any Final Fantasy's done it before. Soundtrack is incredible, but I don't want to give the soundtrack too many points here because so much of the soundtrack was based off stuff that already existed. There's some new stuff in there, right? There's some new songs and new tracks and novel performances, but so much of that soundtrack is based on something that already existed. So I'm not going to let it carry too much weight here. The characters were lovable and endearing. Goddamn, every single one of them. I have my issues and critiques with a couple of them. You know, I felt Sid is too soft. We've been over that. Don't need to beat the dead horse. But the characters were fantastic. It felt like I really got the feeling I was on the journey with them. I really did get that feeling. And I started to feel, because, you know, the struggle with FF7 Rebirth is it's the leg of the story where not very much happens. The ending is where, like, the last 20% of the game is where, like, 80% of the plot happens, right? Not a lot really happens during this leg of the journey. We're really just following around the Sephiroth clones wherever they go. Then we learn about the Black Materia, and then we start to hunt that down, hence the last 20% containing like 80% of the plot. So, as far as this leg of the journey, the plot was always going to be, I don't want to say thin. I don't want to say thin, because I'm not saying it lacks depth. Not at all. But it would be the simplest. Let's put it that way. The simplest. So, ultimately, I think the story was good. I think the plot was good. I think they tried to do too much in the ending. Not going to spoil the ending. Not going to say anything. But I think they tried. I think FF7 Rebirth's flaw is one, it's such a beautiful, damn near perfect game. The only time this game falls short is when it tries to do too much. The only time FF7 Rebirth falls short is when it tries to do too much. When it's trying to do too much with its story. Or for some reason, even though they created this generational immersive gameplay, they're constantly breaking up the gameplay with minigames. I like minigames. I think minigames are cool. I think making some minigames mandatory is okay. But I do think the game suffered from breaking the player up too much with too many of these like little mini games inserted into the main campaign. This is why I think, bringing us back to Astrobot, giving players a little hub, pausing the player, as Andy Brew said, I think is something that is underrated and underutilized. Now imagine that in the third Final Fantasy VII game, maybe there's only a couple mini games that are made mandatory. Meaning you don't even have to win, you just have to play through them. But imagine that on the airship, on the Highwind, that's where your little mini game hub is. You could play a game of cards with Barret, you know, or maybe you could shoot pool with Tifa. You know, you don't have to insert it into the main plot and go overboard. You know, maybe there's a little, you could play Queen's Blood against any party member. Put it on the airship. Put it on the airship so that maybe after a couple hours of playing the campaign, I'm a little bit worn out on the game, but I want to stay in the world. So I'm just going to go on the airship and hang out with the party. Man, anyway, I think that would be a better approach for all of the mini games they want to do than what they did in this game. Again, that's where I feel the game fell short, is all the times they tried to do too much. You didn't need to do too much. You already have a great story. You already have great characters. You already have generational, action-oriented gameplay. Man, double down on your strengths. Double down on the strengths. Don't worry about mixing things up too much. Give the player the option to mix up the gameplay when they want, and you won't have to worry about that pacing in your main campaign. Because that's where I felt a lot of that stuff mixed up the pacing of the gameplay. It mixed up the pacing of the plot. That's really where I feel the game fell short. But now let's get back to singing its praises, okay? Another thing I think FF7 Rebirth did very well, side quests. Side quests, side quests, side quests, which are a very difficult thing to incentivize in modern gaming, but I think FF7 Rebirth did a great job. Some people critique them for putting not crucial story cutscenes behind side quests, but for putting like big character moments behind side quests. Like you can miss a good 10 minutes or so of Sephiroth cutscenes if you don't do all the side quests. There are things like Cissnei, for example. There are a lot of things you're going to miss out on if you don't do the side quests. And I know a lot of people don't like that because they feel like, okay, you're making me do this, or like you're locking me out of this. Bro, you can watch the cutscenes on YouTube. It's not a big deal. So to me, I think it's a great idea to put more character moments, more lore, because that's the thing. I'm in love with the world of FF7. I'm in love with the characters of FF7. You don't always have to incentivize a side quest with money or armor or a weapon. Bro, if there's a Barret cutscene hidden behind that side quest, I'll do it. I'll do it. So those kind of incentive structures in the side quests I liked. I also did think most of the side quests were enjoyable to do. I really do. I think a lot of them were enjoyable to do. Dexholder Red said, I probably would have spent more time with it if it wasn't for the fear of being spoiled on the internet. This is the tragedy of modern gaming, or modern media even. Not even just gaming. Is that, yeah, you're not safe. And there's this incentive to get on things early before you're spoiled. And the worst part is, man, is like there's probably, I'm not going to get too into it. Let's stay focused on the game here. So, getting back to it, the side quests, again, were very enjoyable. I thought the incentives for them were good. And again, the game's graphically stunning, beautiful to look at, beautiful to play. Again, I have my criticisms for it, obviously. But all in all, what they've created here is a new direction for Final Fantasy. Look, in my opinion, I don't care whether Final Fantasy is action or turn-based. I love both genres. I really do. So I don't care what direction they take it in. But as far as their action RPG direction, Final Fantasy, for the first time in a long time, has a formula on their hands that I think will lead to success over and over again. This is the new model. What they've created here is the new model for how a Final Fantasy game should be built. And even if you were to switch out the combat for something turn-based, the way the world fleshes itself out, the way the gameplay fleshes itself out, all of that should remain the same. I think Square Enix did something really, really special here with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It makes me infinitely excited for Part 3. And the best part about Rebirth, I keep going back to it. I'm not done with it, and I'm not going to be done with it for a long time. Again, I keep going back to it. It's so much fun. In so many different ways. It's fun watching all these cutscenes over again. It's fun fighting all those bosses over again. Replay value is a big thing to me. It's a huge thing to me. One of my favorite games of all time is Star Fox 64. It can be beaten in 40 minutes. But I've replayed it probably hundreds of times. Not exaggerating. For a game as long and chunky as FF7 Rebirth, for me to be on my third lap speaks to its credit. The game is long, chunky, lengthy, and it has replay value. That is not achieved lightly, mind you. So they deserve all the credit in the world for what they've built here. I think it's a new winning formula for Final Fantasy in general. I think we're going to see a lot of action RPGs. I think what you're going to see is you're actually going to see, because so many action RPGs have been solo focused, right? Even look at Stellar Blade. You play as one character. Final Fantasy 16, you're playing as one character. Devil May Cry, you're playing as one character. Kingdom Hearts, you're playing as one character. A lot of the action RPG world has been very focused on giving you one lone character to play as. Now, you can have your support characters, right? Like in Kingdom Hearts, like in FF15. You can have your support characters who come through for you. But I think with FF7 Rebirth, its long-standing impact is you're going to see, because it takes 4 or 5 years to develop a game now. So with this dropping in 2024, you're going to see in about 3 or 4 years, come back to this. Come back to this in 2027, 2028. You're going to see in about 3 to 4 years, honestly, maybe even shorter because of Remake. But with Rebirth's impact especially, you're going to see a surge of party-focused action RPGs come into play, thanks to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, it's a game that sold well by traditional standards. The problem is we don't know this game's budget, but I'm willing to bet, based on what we played, that it's a big budget. Now, I don't think they lost money on FF7 Rebirth. In fact, I do believe Square Enix is in the green overall when it comes to FF7 Rebirth, and when it drops on PC, it'll only push them over that margin even more. And let's be honest, they're going to continue to sell Remake, Rebirth, and the third title for years to come. So I do think all these games eventually will get very high up in sales. Excuse me. Especially when they start selling the whole trilogy as one pack. That said, I think unfortunately, what works against Rebirth was how expensive it is to make. Because it's not a cheap game to make, and I think it's one of the reasons we're not getting DLC. And I don't think it's a bad thing, by the way. I don't think it's a bad thing we're not getting DLC. But I think the reason why this game isn't getting DLC is because they cost so much to make. They cost so much to make that all that money and resources and time has to go to the next game because they want to get that out by 2027. They want it out for the 30th anniversary. So, look, all in all, absolutely incredible game. Highly recommend it to anyone who likes RPGs. Highly recommend it to anyone who likes action games. Highly recommend it to anyone who enjoys stories in games. Again, it knocked it out of the park with its gameplay. It knocked it out of the park with its characters. It knocked it out of the park with its soundtrack. It knocked it out of the park with its world building. It knocked it out of the park with its world immersion, all those towns. I think the plot falls a little bit short of the rest of the game, but it's still good. It's still good. But again, we have to consider that it did take place during a very, how do I put it? A very thin a very thin leg of the story's journey. But overall, incredible game. One of my favorites of all time. One of my top 5 Final Fantasy games ever. And I believe it does the Final Fantasy VII brand justice, gives it the respect and love it deserves. It is one of the greatest action RPGs released in the last few years. I'll even say the last 5 years. I think in the last 5 years, this is a top 5 action RPG. 100%. 100%. Okay. Let's keep it rolling. I see chats popping off. We'll get much more into chat. I started noticing the clock was ticking, so I'm trying to get through these nominations, give you my game of the year, and then I'll go in with the chat because we got 2 more games to talk about, gang. We got 2 more games to talk about. All right? That leaves us with, one sec. Let me just grab my Brita. One sec. Okay, here we go. So that leaves us with Metaphor ReFantazio and Stellar Blade. We're going to talk Stellar Blade first. Save Metaphor for last. Okay. Let's pull up. That's the wrong way. Let's pull up. There we go. Nope. I had it right the first time. Okay. And away we go. Stellar Blade, which is, in my opinion, alongside, it's hard to call Astrobot underrated with all the recognition it's gotten. But I will stand by that. I think Stellar Blade, even though it's selling incredibly well, it gets a lot of love from its fan base. I still think it's an underrated game. I still think a lot of people haven't given this game a chance yet that eventually will. And I think a lot of people, especially those who have played New Game Plus and gone around it for a second time, are realizing what an absolutely incredible game this is, lives up to the title of Stellar. But now let's get into the specifics. Let's start with the gameplay. So I just talked about how FF7 Rebirth is the best combat system I've ever played. I stand by that. Eve is my favorite combat warrior to ever play as, if that makes sense. If Eve was an FF7 Rebirth character, her moveset would be my favorite. Let me put it to you like that. I think Rebirth has the superior combat system. I think Eve is the best singular character to play as, if that makes sense. The most sales will come from the PC release because of all the mods for Eve. Yeah, I think PC is going to boost both Stellar Blade and FF7 sales big time. But yeah, it's going to sell. I think on Steam it's going to sell 500,000 copies. Probably more over the long term, but just out from the kick. I think it sells a lot of copies on PC. Josh Z, a member for 21 months, says if they didn't mix up the gameplay, people would criticize Rebirth for being too samey. RPGs are almost always damned if you do, damned if you don't. Josh, I actually agree with you. Josh. I think if they didn't mix up the gameplay with the mini games, people would have complained. I wouldn't have. If you put most of those mini games under a hub that I can access when I want to take a break, I would have sang your praises. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I think you're 100% correct. They would have been damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I can assure you that my opinion would have been the same no matter what they did. But good to see you in here, Josh. Good to see you in here. Feel free to wind back and check out the FF7 portion. I know you're a big Rebirth guy. So getting back to the Stellar Blade of it all. The combat in Stellar Blade is so incredible. Like, if not for Rebirth this year, I would have said this was the best combat of the year. If not for Rebirth. But Eve as a warrior is my favorite warrior to fight as, right on par with Sora in Kingdom Hearts 3. Like, first of all, the counter mechanic. One thing this game has always done right from the start, even in its early trailer releases, is looking flashy and stylish. Not only does countering your enemy's moves look good, it feels good. Right? The gameplay works in a way, and by the way, the haptic feedback on the controller in Stellar Blade is better than any game I've ever played in my entire life. So they deserve credit for that. The way it feels to counter your enemy's moves in this game is so invigorating and taps right into my adrenaline that it immersive is a good word for it, but there's another word I'm looking for. It's so igniting. That's the word. It ignites you when you're countering those moves, and then you wait for your opening and you hit them with a burst attack or something along those lines. It's because it's one of those games where if you make a handful of mistakes, you're dead. If you're later in the game, you make one or two mistakes, you're dead. So there's no way to fight in this game without being locked in, which is what I like about it, a whole lot. That said, playing as Eve, again, they made playing as her feel everything that I just said and more. Because Eve, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, she has a certain swagger to her in battle that feels so good, right? When you play as Eve in battle, you notice that every step she takes is with a purpose, and the way the character moves is with style and swagger, so that even if you're not in control of the fight, you feel like you're in control of the fight. And there's something so entertaining about that, which is ultimately what these games are here to do, is entertain you. And part of the reason we play these games, right, is because we get to play as these powerful warriors that those of us in this very ordinary world will never get to feel what it's like. You know, we're never going to wield the Buster Sword. We're never going to fight off Naytibas, right, and aliens and stuff like that. But video games give us a chance to go into those worlds and see what it would be like, right? I wouldn't trade my world for the Stellar Blade world in a million years. But it's fun to go into that world and see what it would be like. Eve makes me feel more powerful than I think any video game character has ever. And there's a really cool feeling about that. And they deserve a lot of credit for figuring out how to do that. Because I can't exactly explain how they were able to accomplish it. It's a combination of the haptic feedback, the immersive gameplay, the flashiness, the style, the graphic, all of it sort of bleeds into it. And they sort of found a way to get it into that Goldilocks zone. And again, if I want to take the gameplay a little bit further beyond the combat, I can sing the combat's praises all day. If you want to see that combat pushed to its limit, check out Lands the Master over on YouTube. He's got some great Stellar Blade gameplay videos. The combat, like, pushed to its fullest length is just so tremendous, immersive. And I think, you know, we got some Kingdom Hearts fans in here. If Kingdom Hearts adopted Stellar Blade's countering system, I think it would elevate the combat to a new generation. But between the special moves, the combat, perfect dodging, perfect parries, all of that sort of stuff, giving the player an advantage, it's such an immersive combat, forces you to lock in, and really rewards the player, not just in the game, but with the feeling like you just did something badass. Like you feel like you did something badass when you finally kill that boss, or you finally kill off that horde that was giving you a problem. I want to play this, but I don't think I'll be very good at it. That's okay, Josh. There is a story mode, which is an easy mode. So Stellar Blade does contain an easy mode for people who maybe don't feel confident in their action RPG skills or don't feel like they'd be very good at this type of game. It does have a story mode to make it accessible to people who would really rather just experience the game a little bit more loosely and jump into this world. Speaking of which, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I actually did enjoy this world, and in particular, the City of Zion. I love the City of Zion. Honestly, in a post-apocalyptic world, the City of Zion is like this beacon of hope. And don't get me wrong, it has a dreariness to it, because that's how much of a post-apocalyptic world you're in. But when you speak, this is something this game does well as well, like Rebirth, which we spoke of before. Its NPCs and the world around you feels very alive, right? All the NPCs in Zion, man, they all got a little bit of hope to them, right? They're all in this dark, dreary world where shit is a mess, like, and they all just have a little bit of hope. Not all, but most. They have a little bit of hope, and there's something so beautiful about that. It's easy to have hope in a good world. It's easy to have hope in a neutral world. But to have hope in a world as dreary a backdrop as Stellar Blade will give you, there's something beautiful about that. There's something beautiful and immersive about that. And Stellar Blade is a game that I also feel does a really good job of giving the player the power to break up the gameplay when they feel. The fishing mechanic, that's something I'll say too. Oh my God. The fishing mechanic in this game is the best fishing mechanic in any game. It actually relaxes me. I swear. Man, I had a bad day at work like a month ago, and it was fine. It wasn't a bad day to be alive. It was just a bad day at work. I was stressed. There was a lot to do. A lot was put on me. I had to work an hour late. And all I wanted to do when I got off work, because my wife doesn't get home till 7:30, is just play some video games. So I booted up Stellar Blade, and I spent an hour and a half fucking fishing. And let me tell you something. I forgot I had a bad day at work. Because that's something else, too. The Stellar Blade soundtrack is incredible. We listened to a little bit of it. In the intro. Maybe I'll put a little bit of it on right now. Hold on. I'll put a little bit of it on. Like, so much. I'm going to put it low. But so much of the soundtrack is so alive. That's something about this game, right? It's a world that's dying, but it refuses to die, and in that battle against death, it feels alive. It's a game that feels alive, and it's a world that wants to live, and you feel it when you talk to the NPCs. You feel it with Eve and Lily and Adam. Anyway, and you feel it in the gameplay. Is that it's a game that just wants to make you feel alive, and it's filled with characters that want to live. That despite their unfortunate circumstances and situations, they just want to live. Right? They still want to find love. They haven't given up on finding love and things like that. That really took me by surprise. Like, don't get me wrong, the plot isn't anything too fantastic. The plot is serviceable. Right? The overall plot that's unfolding, it's good, not calling it bad. It's good, but it's more serviceable than anything. The characters are what's lovable about the world of Stellar Blade, and not just the main cast, as I'm getting into, the NPCs as well. Some of my favorite characters from this game are NPCs. Some of them technically aren't even living, but they're NPCs. It's just, there's such a charm to this game, right? There's such a charm to this game. There's such a charm to this world that bleeds through it and had me absolutely falling in love with it in a way I didn't expect. I knew when the first few hours of playing this game, I knew I was going to like it. About 8 hours in, I knew I was going to love it. When I started New Game Plus, I fell in love. It was just over. It was just over. And again, the characters are charming, and I think Eve is going to be a flagship character in the gaming industry for years to come. For years to come. For years to come. I think she's got everything you need in a classic gaming icon. Right? She's got a unique, cool, badass look. She's cute. She's sexy. She's charming. She's powerful. She's strong. She's determined. Right? She's flawed. She's determined to overcome those flaws. There's so many things about the character that are worth falling in love with. So I think they nailed it when making a main character that you can get behind. And like I said, there's no character on Earth that made me feel more powerful to play as than as Eve from Stellar Blade. So again, gameplay, combat through the roof. It's a post-apocalyptic world, so it's definitely not as alive as FF7 Rebirth. Its towns are very much alive. Zion, that is. Zion is very much alive. There are other settlements and stuff, but Zion's like the main one. And ultimately, yeah, there's a little bit of treasure hunting here and there. There's stuff for you to do. But it's a game that plays it simple in a lot of ways. And, we speak about good business practices. This is a game that's made last we heard, and this was months and months and months ago, last we heard from Shift Up, they sold 1 million copies, which led them into tens of millions of dollars of profit. They had such a healthy budget for this game that in just selling 1 million copies, they were tens of millions of dollars in the green, tens of millions of dollars in profit. They just announced Shift Up Studio at the end of the year. Every single employee at Shift Up Studio was gifted a PS5 Pro and a $3,400 Christmas bonus. That's the industry I want, man. This right here, Stellar Blade, Shift Up, everything going on with this to me is everything this industry should strive to become. Everything they should strive to become. Down from creating an amazing game with incredible immersive gameplay to making cool, charming characters that are worth getting behind and getting attached to, an immersive world, incredible soundtrack. There's, again, just a never-ending waterfall of stuff to love. And then on top of it, the practices were so healthy and it was budgeted so healthy that in just 1 million sales, which is a lot, but for big studios, it's not. 1 million sales, they're tens of millions of dollars in profit, gifting all their employees a PS5 Pro with $3,400 signing bonuses. Meanwhile, here in the West, tens of thousands of people are getting laid off. If you care about all those developers getting laid off, you would champion what Shift Up is doing. Because they made a AAA game at same quality, if not better, than what a lot of other AAA studios are doing. Better than most. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. They made something better than what most AAA developers are doing at a fraction of the budget. And now they're not firing people, they're hiring people. And they're giving bonuses and gifting PS5 Pros. That's the industry I want. That's the industry I want over here, where we're making games and the games do well and they don't need to sell tens of millions of copies to make a profit. No, you sell 1 million copies, your fucking employees get Christmas bonuses. That's what I'm looking for, man. That's what I want to see. Now, I understand there are some games that are going to have bigger budgets because they want to be bigger games, and that's okay. But you got to be able to carry that weight. To FF7's credit, it can carry that weight, right? But Stellar Blade is the more profitable game. Now that carries value. You're talking about Game of the Year. I guarantee you every indie studio and some of these bigger studios that are looking at downsize are looking at Shift Up and looking at what they did and how they could do it. How can they emulate what they accomplished? That's what I want to see. I talked about it earlier in the episode. I think the future of this industry is not going to be this corporate consolidation where all these studios get bought out. That is going to happen. Don't get me wrong. That is going to happen. You're going to see more of that consolidation. But the future is not those consolidated powerhouses like Tencent. The future is going to be the hundreds, if not 1,000, little shift-ups and Team Asobis that sprout up and are able to churn out games like this. So, with all the praise you give it, I've been considering playing Stellar Blade. If you like action games, this is it. And if the game's too hard for you, it has an easy mode. No shame. Games are to have fun, right? You have nothing to prove to anyone. Games are here to have fun. Now, if a game like, Elden Ring wants difficulty to be part of the experience, that's fine, right? But Stellar Blade gives you that option. So I can't sing this game's praises enough. The characters are cool and charming. I think Eve is iconic and will be henceforth. I think the plot is good, mostly serviceable, but good. I think the gameplay is incredible. And again, I look forward to playing as Eve again and again and again for years to come. Even if I don't ever get another Stellar Blade game, even though they softly announced a sequel already, but even if I never got a Stellar Blade game again, this would be a game I continue to come back to over and over and over. So shout out to this team. They did a great job. Let's move on to our final. Oh, and also, excuse me, actually. Gotta give them love for the Nier Automata DLC. Just want to give them the love for that. But thank you for being a member for 14 months, Artist Joint. And now let's move into our final game, Metaphor. No shame in easy mode as long as you're having fun. Games are to have fun. No shame in easy mode, but also no shame on the developers who want difficulty to be part of their experience. I think the day Elden Ring has an easy mode is the day that series is done. It would be a kiss of death because they've made it part of their identity. And I respect that. But like you're saying, Trousers, games like Stellar Blade or perhaps Kingdom Hearts that offer you the easy mode, there's no shame in it. Have fun. You're supposed to have fun. Shadowflare says Sonic 3 proved that a serviceable plot done well can be better than a high concept plot done poorly. Shadowflare, 100%. That is the chat of the day right there. A serviceable plot done well can be better than a high concept plot done poorly. Or even a high concept plot done mediocre. I'll take the serviceable plot done well over the high concept plot done in a mediocre fashion. Stellar Blade did their serviceable plot very well. Characters with heart. Lots of heart. And not just that main trio of Adam, Eve, and Lily, but, side characters too, man. But let's get into Metaphor. Which to me, I think the reason why I absolutely love and adore this game is because, man, turn-based combat deserves not only to live, but to thrive. And I am so pleased with all the love Metaphor has gotten. By the way, Will, thank you for that. This is the true power of games. Done well indeed. Member for 15 months. Thank you. But getting back to Metaphor, turn-based combat is not a thing of the past. I hate that there are some people out there, they look at turn-based combat like, oh, this is something that just existed because we didn't have the technology to really have a full-fledged action game or to have a sort of action sequence with multiple characters, and now we have the technology, so turn-based is a thing of the past. No, that's not it. Turn-based is a genre, and it's its own thing. And it didn't exist simply because action RPGs couldn't. No, it exists because it's its own thing, right? And Metaphor's turn-based combat is the best turn-based combat I've played since Persona 5. I like the way Atlus does their turn-based games. I do. I'm a huge fan of Octopath Traveler 2. I think it's one of the best turn-based games I've ever played. But I prefer combat-wise what they did here. The thing that makes Atlus's turn-based combat fun is that every battle is a puzzle. Every battle is a puzzle you have to figure out. And there are two ways you can figure it out. You can figure out the puzzle to the point you don't take any damage, and the game will reward you for that. That's one thing I loved about this game. And there's a puzzle in the sense of, how do I defeat this these enemies by sustaining the least amount of damage possible. Those are ultimately the two outcomes you need to figure out. Is there a way I can win this battle without sustaining any damage? And if not, is there any way I can win this battle by sustaining the least amount of damage possible? That's the puzzle that Atlus presents before you. Now, boss battles are boss battles. Plain and simple, you have to win. But when you're going through dungeons and you're going through mob fights, be it in Persona or Metaphor, typically that's the puzzle that you're given. And they make it fun, dude. They make it fun. And again, every time I get an unscathed triumph, those of you that play the game, you know what that is. You get that little dopamine boost, dude. You get that little dopamine. You're like, yeah, I was good. Yeah, so give me more XP. Give me more money. I was good. I figured out your game. I know how to do this. It's the gameplay loop has been mastered by Atlus. The UI has been mastered by Atlus. Soundtracks have been mastered by Atlus. They're a big name player in the world of RPGs, and the world cannot be better for it. For real, man. For real. But back to the combat again. You know, there are a lot of different kinds of RPGs out there. There's a lot of different kinds of RPGs. And one of the problems with action RPGs, not problems, one of the things about action RPGs is at times the action combat, in order for the action combat to thrive, sometimes RPG elements have to give, right? And you see that sometimes with a lot, like, so for instance, right? In in Final Fantasy, Barret is a gunner, and there's nothing you could do about it, right? And this is true in a lot of Final Fantasy games. So because of that, you don't get a lot of class changes, especially in more modern games, right? What I love about Metaphor was it really gives you the whole, what up, Suko? What up, my dude? What I love about Metaphor is it gives you that old school RPG feel in that any character can be anything. Now, I'm preferable to the way FF10 does it. I like that you're locked into a class, but you have a sphere grid or you have an RPG grid where you can grow the characters in whatever direction you want. I think there's something very cool about that. I like the way Octopath Traveler 2 did this, where every character had a primary class, but you, the player, could unlock secondary classes, and you were able to customize what every character's secondary class is. I did love that Metaphor was just like, screw it, anyone could be anything. Choose whatever archetype you want. Everybody has the archetype they start with, but you could train anyone to be any kind of archetype. And archetype essentially not only holds significance in the lore, but it dictates what your class is when it comes to your warrior class, your combat. So, gotta give Metaphor credit for that. There's that fucking Octopath again. Yeah, I know. I'm gonna keep fucking bringing it up. It's a goddamn classic, okay? And I won't back down until the goddamn world realizes it. Anyway, back to the Metaphor of it all. So, the turn-based combat to me was so much fun, so incredible. I love seeing turn-based thrive. I think Metaphor being nominated for Game of the Year as a turn-based combat game is great. Baldur's Gate 3, similarly, you're seeing a sort of resurgence of this kind of gameplay and not this attitude of this is a thing of the past. And I think Metaphor speaks to that, and I'm very happy about it. I've been playing Marvel Rivals all morning. Dude, it's so good. We were talking about it earlier. I gave it an honorable mention for Game of the Year. Not in the running, not in the top 4, honorable mention. Vitrin loves Octopath because Vitrin is based. Keeping it rolling, though. So, Metaphor's gameplay. Again, the turn-based was incredible, but also the class system I thought was incredible, too. Let's talk about the lore. Lore is so important in an RPG. Because it's one of the things that drag you into the world. Now, when I say lore, what do I mean exactly? As far as Metaphor goes, things like the archetypes, things like all the different races, all the different nations, different cities, the geopolitical stuff, all that sort of stuff being built into the lore, the king's magic. Man, it's so much cooler than anything they did with Persona. I'm a huge Persona fan, but the Metaphor lore kicks the shit out of Persona lore. I'll say it. I love Persona 3, 4, and 5. Metaphor's lore takes the cake. They deserve all the credit in the world for it. And the way that they were able to wove in the lore into the gameplay and into the class system was so smart. My dog got the robe on. Landy sauced up on us tonight. It's funny you say sauced up. Somebody earlier called me homeless for wearing this. But yes, we're rocking the cardigan robe, baby. It's Game of the Year 2024, first podcast of 2025. I announced in the beginning of the episode, for those who may just be tuning in now, the Lodge is getting a makeover. Not physically, this will all stay the same, but our logo is changing, our color scheme's changing, banner is changing, stream assets are changing, a lot of change coming. Getting back to Metaphor over here, though. I can't sing the gameplay praises enough, so I'll leave those aside. Soundtrack is a 9 out of 10. Atlas always nailing it with the soundtrack. I'm going to give them the praises there. Plot and characters. Let's talk plot and characters. Anyone who hates on robes just ain't got one. Best shit out there. Cozy, baby. They're cozy. Have you played Persona 1 and 2? I have not. I would like to one day, but I have not as of yet. Let's talk about the plot and characters. Characters were a bit of a slow burn for me. My favorites are Hazme, Yufa, Stroll. Who would I put number 4? Hazme, Yufa, Stroll, and Gallica. I'd probably put Gallica number 4. But they were a bit of a slow burn for me. It was really only when Hazme showed up that I felt the party started to have some actual chemistry. Not that Stroll and Hulkenberg didn't. I just felt like Hazme started to make them feel like a party. So once Hazme showed up, the characters really took off for me. And I've found myself quite loving and enjoying a number of these characters. I also think Metaphor had the best voice acting of any game this year. I'll say that. I think the fact that no Metaphor voice actors were nominated at Game of the Year is an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment. The best voice acting of 2024 is Metaphor ReFantazio, and there's no fucking contest. Zero. I'll fight. I will die on that hill. There's a hill I'll die on. The voice acting in Metaphor surpasses anything else from 2024. That's not to say Rebirth didn't have great voice acting. It did. It's not to say Stellar Blade didn't have great voice acting. It did. But the voice acting in Metaphor, mwah, chef's kiss, 10 out of 10. Seriously. But the characters were a slow burn, but I ended up coming around and actually quite enjoying them. I do think Persona characters are more lovable, and I do find myself preferring the Persona casts to the Metaphor cast. But I did really, really, really like a lot of these characters and a lot of their stories. The Black Okage, another gaming streamer, said the same shit. What did he say exactly? Maybe I need to have him on the podcast. Unless he's such a big channel, he won't reply to my email, but that's fine. Those guys get swarmed. Like, my emails get swarmed, and I've got like fucking 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. I can only imagine what big guys have to deal with. So, getting back to Metaphor here. The characters were great. Again, slow burn, but I ended up loving all of them in the end. I had my favorites. The plot... it's good. Okay, let me say that. It's good. I think it's the most overrated part of the game. Let me be clear about that. I think the lore, like archetypes and the lore and the races and the cities and the nations, I think the lore is fantastic. I think the characters are fantastic. I think the plot, a bit of I don't know about Metaphor voice acting. Okay. He gets it. He gets it. The voice acting. Okay. Where was I? On Metaphor? The plot. That's right. So the plot is good. I think it's terribly overrated. I'd be happy to discuss it with somebody. I'm not saying I know the plot better than anyone and stuff like that. And anyway, look, it's a good plot. I just think there's a lot of things that happen because plot. There's a lot of things that happen because plot. And it's hard for me to talk about this without spoiling anything, so I'm not going to. But for those that have played the game, I think you're going to pick up on what I'm saying. The plot essentially here is that there's an election being held of who's going to be the new ruler, right? And that there's a sequence of trials that all the candidates have to perform in order to gain the public's trust, gain the public's love, gain the public's vote and consent, right? Very similar to Dawntrail's story in that way. And conceptually, that's very strong. Now, there was a concept introduced to this contest that prohibited anyone from doing a particular thing, right? You're thinking you're in this battle for who's going to be ruler. You might think of a strategy to win this contest. Maybe there's a certain candidate that you don't want around. Anyway, the king's magic preferred a certain path to victory from being utilized. I thought that was very cool. Wow. You know what I mean? Wow. You're going to host this contest and you're going to take away perhaps the most common avenue RPG characters have to solving some of their problems. And I was like, oh shit, we got to figure out this problem, but we're not allowed to do this? Oh man, how do we get around that? That means we got to win this contest on merit alone. And then a weapon gets introduced that allows anyone to negate that one rule. And I was like, why did we do that? We spent 70% of the game having to work around this rule only to find an item that lets us bypass the rule? A MacGuffin? I don't know, because I thought that narrowing the path to victory and eliminating, let's say, a very popular method for victory was so cool. And again, it forced the characters to find new ways to succeed or to double down on different methods of gaining victory. And then you're 70% of the way there, you're going to introduce something that lets them bypass the rule? That just didn't sit well with me. Also, there's a character, I'm not going to say who, but we meet her, right? And upon just meeting her, she finds out that one character is willing to go to extreme lengths, right? And then she finds out this character is willing to go to extreme lengths, and they go, I never knew they'd be willing to go that far. And then literally like 10 minutes later, she's willing to go that far. Like, oh, guess that's what we got to do. And I was like, oh, that was a quick turnaround. Oh, there's just certain things like that, right? And again, it's hard for me to be specific because I don't want to spoil anything. Granted, they had no idea that MacGuffin existed. 100%. It wasn't the worst handled thing, Rock. It wasn't the worst handled thing. It was just a MacGuffin that was introduced where I was like, no, the story is so much more interesting without this thing around. The story is so much more interesting if they got to solve their problems without this thing. Now, given, not going to get into it, we know how it all turns out. That's fine. I just felt introducing it was sort of not complaining. Plot was good, but these are the certain things I take issue with. There's just a few because plot moments that happen in every story, but I felt that in Metaphor they were particularly a little much. Again, without getting specific, it's hard for me to say it, but that's something I felt held the game back. That's something I felt held the game back. Okay, here, I so desperately want to point out an example because it paints my point, but I'm sticking by spoiler free, so I'll leave it at that. Plot is good. I just have some moments that I have an issue with that I felt were a little lazy or a little bit MacGuffin-esque. But all in all, the characters are incredibly endearing. They all have very neat, clean, and sometimes very moving character arcs. They're very enjoyable. For instance, Yuffie, like, man, the second Yuffie joins the party, she brings such an endearing energy and such a lovable energy to the squad that I felt was so needed. Amazing. Amazing. But, you know, the strength of this game really is its combat and its lore. That's really where I feel like this game is at its strongest. Combat and lore. Characters are really good. Soundtrack is really good. Plot is good, but at times I felt it was too big for its britches. Suko says, okay, I can understand what you're saying. Took away the handicap that kept the game more engaging. Yeah, that could be annoying. Yeah, and the story kept the story more engaging in particular. You know, I was like, hey, part of the cool concept from the very beginning was that we're not allowed to do X. And then after 50, 60 hours of not being allowed to do X, you're going to put something in my hand that lets me do X? Didn't like it. The game's beautiful too. Can't leave that out. It's one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen. Anime cutscenes, by the way, I want a surgence of anime cutscenes. I think a lot of the 3D models look great. I think a lot of 3D cutscenes look great. I think the anime cutscenes are the best looking thing in games. I like a lot of the CGI cutscenes in Rebirth are mind-blowing. Don't get me wrong. The 3D CGI cutscenes in Rebirth is better than anything you're going to see in the movie theater right now. But man, the anime aesthetic in a cutscene, there's something about it that just hits. There's something about it that just hits. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us right down to it. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Metaphor ReFantazio, Stellar Blade. Which one is the quintessential game of the year? Which one is it? It's hard for me to say. Let me address Rock here, because he does bring up a good point. In fairness, most of the 70 hours are spent trying to find a way to do X. Yes, right? They wanted to find some way they could pull that off. Handing them a MacGuffin is not what I thought they were going to do. And I think finding a way to win and achieve what they were trying to win and achieve without resorting to that, I thought actually was going to be a really cool concept to play out, right? And these are just my preferences, guys. Everything I'm saying here today, by the way, I am not speaking objectively. These are personally my preferences. Maybe your preference is you thought that MacGuffin was a great plot twist. And you know what? If that tickles your fancy, more power to you. This is the Landy Lodge game of the year. So, you know, if you find yourself, you don't agree with what I said, I don't think any differently of you. All right. Let's move on here. These are our 4 nominees for Game of the Year. All of them are worthy of it. Let me tell you that right now. Every single one is worthy of it. Let's start with Astrobot. All right, we've gone over it, so I'm not gonna give you an ear beating with my reasons anymore. But Astrobot, you know, I think a lot of people looked at the cute art style. I think a lot of people looked at the fact the game only takes, 15 hours to beat. I think a lot of people looked at the fact that, it was just a smaller game in general. But Game of the Year doesn't mean you were the biggest. Game of the Year doesn't mean you were the sexiest. Game of the Year doesn't mean you were the coolest. Game of the Year means a lot of things. But primarily it means you were fun. It also means looking back on that year, people are going to remember you. It also means that you did something in your game that will be emulated by your genre and your competitors in years to come. And all 4 of these games, even Astrobot, who I saw a lot of people tried to speak out against, achieved that tenfold. So it 100% absolutely deserves to be here. However, of these 4 games, I can comfortably eliminate it. Astrobot will not be my Game of the Year. To be honest, 2K25 will be my Game of the Year. Yes, Suko, you got it. Actually, I think I can get you guys... no, it's not there. Actually, now that they're out, maybe I can put you guys back on the screen. Oh boy, yeah, there we go. Let's put you over here now, since Astrobot is out. You know what? Let's do top to bottom. That's going to look cleaner. There we go. All right. Now, Rebirth, Stellar Blade, Metaphor. And if I'm being honest with you guys, I came into this stuck between two games. I've thought about this a lot over the last month especially. And I've been stuck between two games in particular. I knew coming into this Astrobot wasn't going to win. Even though it was in my top 4. I knew coming into this I wasn't going to pick Astrobot. All 3 of these games had a chance. But one game had less of a chance than the other 2. Because I went into this pretty open-minded. I try not to make a final decision until I'm live and on camera with you guys when I do this kind of stuff. But I will say, the third game I'm going to eliminate. Well, the second game I'm going to eliminate. Third place in my Game of the Year conversation is going to be Metaphor ReFantazio. My number 3 Game of the Year, but not my Game of the Year. Incredible game. Deserves all the love and praise that it gets. I think Atlas found its third pillar, right? I think Atlas found its third pillar. They've got Atlas. I mean, they've got Persona. They've got Shin Megami Tensei. Now they've got Metaphor. I'd be very happy with the sequel. I want to see where that lore and all that interesting stuff goes. But ultimately, I don't pick them for Game of the Year. They're 100% Game of the Year worthy. I think there's just a few things that held the game back for me compared to these other two. I think the turn-based combat was absolutely great. I think the archetype class system was absolutely great. However, ultimately, with its gameplay, I found it too similar to what Atlas has already done before. Ultimately. Right? It spiritually could be a Persona 6. It spiritually could be a Persona 6, but it really doesn't do things that much differently from Persona 5. Even in its gameplay. The archetype system is very different, right? But the way the combat feels does very much feel like Persona all over again. And that's okay. Not knocking it. But ultimately, as amazing as the combat was, it didn't really do anything that different. Archetype system aside, right? But that's UI gameplay, right? Not in the moment gameplay or in combat gameplay. So while what they did was tremendous, they are 100% Game of the Year worthy. If they're your Game of the Year, I 100% understand why. Just between its plot falling a little bit short for me and its gameplay not being... its gameplay not having evolved too much from its predecessors, I'm placing it beneath these next two. Now, hold up, who made Stellar Blade again? Shift Up. Shift Up Studios in South Korea made Stellar Blade. These are my top 2 games of the year. For many reasons. And I came into this not sure who I'm going to pick. I'm going to put it bluntly. I think Rebirth is the better game. But Stellar Blade's better for gaming. And that's not to say Rebirth is bad for gaming. It's not. It's great for gaming, okay? I'm not saying that. But there's no denying what Shift Up did with Stellar Blade. They showed you can make a AAA quality game with the beautiful graphics the industry loves so much. You can make a AAA quality game, budgeted at a fraction of what the West is doing, create a brand new IP with a brand new protagonist, and make waves. Look, FF7 Rebirth deserves a lot of love for what it did and what it's doing, but it was resting on the legacy of one of the most popular IPs in the history of video games. Everything Shift Up did with Stellar Blade was from scratch. And it was their first console game ever. So in that sense, I'm very impressed with what they pulled off over at Shift Up. And I think Stellar Blade has a very long and successful future in front of it. I think if the gaming industry does get better, it's because Shift Up is showing a new model, where you don't need 5,000, 18,000 employees to make great games, you know? But at the end of the day, I felt Rebirth was the better game. So I'm going with my game of the year, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. That's my choice for game of the year in 2024. Because, man, plain and simple, this is one of the best video games I've ever played in my life. This was one of the best video games I've ever played in my life. And maybe it didn't meet Square Enix's sales expectations. And it was of such great quality, I do believe they deserve to profit more off this game than they did. But they will continue to once it comes to PC and continues to sell over time. But ultimately, as a game, as a gaming experience, I have seldom played anything like FF7 Rebirth before. Nothing immersed me in its world like FF7 did. It has the best combat system of any game I've ever played. And even though Stellar Blade did so much right, both from a gameplay, character design, soundtrack, and business perspective, the fact of the matter is, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a once-in-a-generation game. It is a game of such wild magnitude, I couldn't have fathomed it existing 10 years ago. All I'm going to say is, I'm not sure we'll ever get games like the FF7 trilogy ever again. I think there's something very special here, right? And through and through, you know, it's easy for games to fall in love with the cinematic experience these days. I'm very happy that Rebirth prioritized gameplay and gameplay immersion, because that's the thing. If you want to tell a good story in games, it can't be done without the gameplay immersion. You can write the best story anyone's ever written, but if the gameplay is boring, it's going to totally fuck up the story presentation of what you wrote. Josh G says, I put 500 hours in over 8 months. I don't do that anymore. It's a tremendous game with a lot to do. And it just made me happy. Ultimately, when I think about what game made me the happiest this year, it was Rebirth. Now again, guys, I'm a lifelong FF7 fan. There's a clear bias here. But even in my bias, Stellar Blade and Metaphor almost snatched it. Even in my bias, Stellar Blade and Metaphor almost snatched it. But this is a game I would recommend to anybody. All right, chat. What was your game of the year? I want everybody in the chat. I know we only got a handful of you still with us here at the end. We got Josh, Suko, and Will, and Shadowflare. He was here, and Rock. Whatever your game of the year was, feel free to punch it in. Feel free to punch it in before we wrap up today. Hellblade 2 is the perfect example of what you are talking about. I've never played Hellblade 2, but I will take your word for it. Suko says, I'm just waiting for the FF7 scale game from Soft. I think the game is coming out. Is going to make the good game developers go harder. I see what you mean. When From Software drops their FF7 level game, it's going to be pretty out of control. Trouser says, Concord! Yeah, we can't forget that the biggest flop in gaming history happened. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, says Shadowflare. Which, right on the money. We love that here. Rock says Persona 3 Reload was his game of the year. You know, I was going to give them an honorable mention. I was very close to giving them an honorable mention today. But I think because the game was such a faithful remake, in so many ways, I decided to pass on it. I as opposed to things that were just maybe a little bit more new and novel to the year. I mean, it is a remake at the end of the day, more of a remake than, say, Rebirth is. So that's why I maybe passed on that. But I respect Persona 3 as your Game of the Year choice. I'd have to say if the game in the running is Astrobot, Suko Bars. Vitrin says they have no clue. That's a good place to be. Remember when I tried to make you play the beta with me? I'm sorry, I'm a terrible friend. Dude, when it comes to those kinds of games, I don't play the betas. It's like with Marvel Rivals. I waited to see that it was good. Then I hopped on. Victor says FF7 Rebirth is their Game of the Year. SB Wielder, I have to respond to you, by the way. I got your message. I haven't responded to you. Says Rebirth as well. We got a lot of Rebirth fans in here. I'm happy to see it. Suko Bar said the one I had the most fun with as soon as I picked it up, I felt just good. You know, Astrobot made me remember some giddy feelings I've forgotten about. It did make me feel like a kid again. Because that's primarily when I played platformers, was when I was a kid. Artist Join says, I didn't play many new games in 2024, so I'll have to go with Echoes of Wisdom. I still have to play that. Didn't make any of my lists, but I haven't played it. I have it. My wife got it for me for Christmas, so I'll probably play it soon. Josh Z goes with Rebirth. Gotta love it. I think part 3 is going to be the perfect blend of the first two. I think so too. And I look forward to it. But anyway, we're going to wrap up here today, guys. Again, the podcast is going to go offline until the rebrand is ready. Probably not going to put up any gaming videos until the rebrand is ready. We will do some live streams. I'm going to do my Nuzlocke hooked on Marvel Rivals, so you can expect to see a lot of that. But in the next week or 2 or 3, the logo is going to be different. The way the stream looks is going to be different. It's going to be fun, man. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. I have a lot of things planned for the Lodge. Again, I took the last couple weeks off for the holidays. There will be no Morning Quest tomorrow. Morning Quest will resume next week. Hey, Lanny, can I get an invite to the Discord? Yeah, I got you. I think I sent one to you, but I'll get it for you again. I forgot to get this to you yesterday. Here it is. I'll drop it in the YouTube chat too, in case anyone's not in there yet. Discord link. I've been playing mostly nostalgic games mostly this year. I got a feeling 2025 is going to be a year of the backlog for me. Can you give us a hint about some of the stuff I'm working on? Not yet. Not yet. But there's a lot. There's stuff I'm working on that's very channel relevant, and there's things I wish to expand the channel into that won't come up for a while. Just know I'm cooking. Just know your boy is cooking. Okay? That's all you got to know. But we're going to change our logo. We're going to stay the Landy Lodge. That's not going to change. We're going to change the logo, change the color scheme, change the aesthetic, get some new streaming assets. It's going to be fun. We're going to wrap it up here for now. Guys, gals, sickos, normies, thanks for chilling. Love podcasting. I'll miss you guys while we're a little bit offline. Morning Quest will keep going. But yeah, you can expect a video with the rebrand somewhat soon. But thanks for hanging out. We'll probably stream tomorrow, either the Nuzlocke or Marvel Rivals. But again, FF7 Rebirth, my Game of the Year. Stellar Blade is number 2. Metaphor is number 3. Astrobot is number 4. And with that said, we're wrapping it up here. Thanks for hanging out, ladies and gentlemen. You all be good out there. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. And I will see all of you sickos and normies next time. Peace out, y'all.